It is Monday, February 26th, 2018, and this is Seahawks Chats slash 3000 NFL Mock Draft with Kenneth Arthur. I'm Kenneth Arthur. What's the slash for? I guess 3000 NFL Mock Draft is the draft podcast that I do with Rob Staten, where we talk about the draft. I don't have Rob with me today, so the draft part remains. And the Seahawks Chats, well, that's when I talk to, someone about the Seahawks, and that's also happening today. And my guest right now is Alistair Corp of Field Goals, the website that I work at and that has this podcast. This is far too much explanation for something, but I'm pushing ahead anyway. This week, Alistair is going to come on and talk about the NFL scouting combine. We'll talk about the Seahawks and their draft needs and all of the above. But first of all, Alistair, your name, it is so interesting to me. And I think like when I first, I think to people, because like in the world of blogging or the internet, people choose pseudonyms or, names that are not theirs to work under or to be identified as. And I think the name Alistair Corp initially comes off as a pseudonym, as something that you would choose as your online handle. But in fact, this is your name, and it is a bit of an unusual name. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is that's the name they gave me. I think if I were to come up with one, it would be a better name than that. Yeah, it was both my parents are English, so I suppose it's an English name. But growing up, we got a lot of phone calls asking for like Alistair Corporation from telemarketers, which was a huge pain. But yeah, it is. You're not the first person to think that it's not a real name. I'm sure you will not be the last.
What is the is there any history with the corp? Because it also almost seems like a military thing, or it's like corporation. Is there any history there?
I've wondered the same. I've never gotten any answers, but you'll be the first to know when I finally do.
Fair enough. Yeah, and we appreciate that here at Field Goals. Is initial immediate information on people's names and family histories. Well, let's talk. I do want to talk a little bit about your own personal history. What's your relationship with the Seahawks? Where did you like grow up? How did that begin? And then eventually, when did you decide to start writing about it?
Yeah, I grew up in British Columbia in Canada, so like geographically Seattle is the closest, but it didn't really have anything to do with that. I started watching football the year of Super Bowl 40, and as like a 10, 11-year-old, I just was obsessed with the running back position, and so at the time, obviously Sean Alexander kind of taking the league by storm, and that just kind of sort of caught my attention. The next year was on the cover of Madden. I was a 12-year-old kid playing Madden. This dude was on the cover, and it was kind of over from there, and I was stuck with them for better or for worse.
Yeah. Then are you still obsessed with the running back position?
I'm obsessed with the running back position as long as you don't draft in the first round.
Okay. We're getting right into it. Obviously a highly sensitive topic, or, maybe somewhat controversial in terms of having two sides that are vehemently on their side of the fence post, was that drafting a running back in the first round. And we are talking about the draft and running backs and the combine and everything. So you would say that for yourself, you do not believe in drafting a running back early in today's NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as passionate about it as some other people. I'm not necessarily on the fence. I don't think it's the best use of resources, but if you can get a guy like, I mean, not that he had the best rookie season, but if you can get a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the first round, where he is a little bit more of a fit for the modern NFL, then I think it's not a terrible pick. But still, I mean, you saw McCaffrey go 10th and then Kamara go in the third round. So there is still something to why would you take that guy in the first round?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's okay to skip ahead a little bit and just say, like, for like someone like Saquon Barkley, what are your thoughts on Saquon Barkley, who, is being touted as, he could be the highest drafted running back since Reggie Bush, and go number 2 or number 1. And people will say, justify it in any number of ways, including his ability to catch passes and be the most complete back of whatever. But even in a scenario where, first of all, do you think Saquon Barkley is the best back in years?
I don't know that I'm necessarily the authority to make that declaration, but I think he's a better prospect than Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette were. Both of which you can say whether or not they should have gone top 5, but they were top 5 talents. And I think Barkley is exceeded both of their play.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's for me. I also I'm probably more even stronger on that side of don't draft a running back early, including to the point where people are saying, if you're talking about Ezekiel Elliott and you talk about his rookie season, and obviously you can say Ezekiel Elliott, it would be easy to argue that he's the best running back in the NFL. I mean, Le'Veon Bell, there's other players who may be better, but you could easily argue that Elliott is the best. And even in those scenarios where people say, look at the Cowboys and look how good they are when they have Ezekiel Elliott, or look at the Jaguars, they drafted Fournette and they went to the AFC Championship game. And even in this scenario where you say you draft the Adrian Peterson, so you draft a Hall of Fame running back, best running back in the NFL over the next 10 years. Even then, I say don't take him in the top 5. Don't take him in the top 10. Maybe in some drafts, if the talent is so depleted, we do have these years when the classes just aren't very strong. Maybe you take him in the 20s or something like that, or in the teens, maybe. But even then, I say don't do it. And if you say Saquon Barkley is going to be the best running back in the NFL next year, I would still say you'd be dumb to not take a position of harder to acquire players or of more value in today's NFL. Would you say that even if the running back was, say, going to be the best in the NFL, you would avoid taking him early?
Absolutely, yeah, because you can find, for how much he's going to contribute to you winning or losing football games, you can find a guy that's going to equal that production. He may not be as talented as a running back, but you can find someone like that in the middle of the draft. I mean, even last year, Kareem Hunt came out in the 3rd round and was phenomenal.
Yeah. And yeah, Kareem Hunt, Alvin Kamara, is absolutely there to be had. I think the 2nd and 3rd round is a great sweet spot where you're going to get, these are where the top running backs should be coming off the board, and the NFL usually does treat it that way. And the Seahawks, of course, are a team that is in that position right now. They need running back help, and we're going to talk about maybe some of the ways that they can go with that. But let's start talking about the scouting combine. It starts on Tuesday, if I'm correct. Well, why don't you tell me and tell everyone out there the scouting combine, what to expect this week, or at least what it is, like what's going on for the next week.
Yeah, well, all the draft's top prospects are coming to beautiful Indianapolis. They're going to get poked and prodded. They're going to be mildly uncomfortable in really tight spandex in front of scouts. And we're finally going to get some measurables, so we're going to have a clearer picture. Because right now, pretty much, I mean, we have the idea of maybe 2 dozen cornerbacks that could fit Seattle's ideals, but until we get full measurements on these guys, it's everybody's best guess. Everybody knows about the 32-inch arm requirement, and we're finally actually going to have an idea of who fits that and who is a realistic possibility.
And if someone doesn't know about the 32-inch arm requirement, can you speak a little bit on the history of that, as well as talk about if there's been any change, or, can you think of things in the last year or so that may go against that strict requirement?
Yeah, well, in Pete Carroll's history, I don't think they've ever selected a cornerback with shorter than 32-inch arms, and rightfully so. I think it was last year Rob Staten wrote something about all the All-Pro cornerbacks in the past 5 or 6 years, and only one of them had shorter than 32-inch arms, and it was, I think, Marcus Peters, actually, who had 31.5-inch. But even like a guy like Chris Harris, who's a smaller slot cornerback, he has like 33-inch arms. Length is incredibly important in that position, and people like to think that things like that at the combine are a little bit trivial, but they do really matter.
And I think, I think Justin Coleman comes in under 32 inches, but again, it's like he's a slot cornerback, which is a different sort of responsibility, and also the cost of acquiring a Justin Coleman was so low that it seemed okay. Well, we can take shots there, but in terms of the first round, or this is an interesting year because the Seahawks don't have a round 2 or round 3 pick. They traded their 2nd and 3rd round picks away, and they're not getting any comp picks in the 3rd round. So right now the Seahawks don't have any picks on day 2 whatsoever. They would have to trade back or trade up. So does it change your mindset at all? I mean, it has to, but like in terms of looking at the draft next year, next year. In terms of looking at this year's draft with the Seahawks, what does it do to like have this massive hole where they don't have any day 2 picks in terms of looking ahead and feeling hopeful or scouting prospects?
I mean, as far as the top of the draft goes, where they're kind of missing those two day 2 selections, I haven't thought much of it because in my heart of hearts, I just believe they're going to recoup at least one of those picks. I mean, we've seen John Schneider in the past trade down year after year. I can't see a scenario in which they only draft once in the first 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as kind of day 3 goes, I think that's where the team sticks even harder to their ideals and their measurements, because then you're going to be drafting a risk no matter what. So you might as well say, okay, this guy, he has this like similar athletic profiles to people who succeed in the NFL, and he's our kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to go like out on a limb and draft this risk who doesn't even fit with what we want in the position. We have to stick to what we have, and we know at least we've seen those players molded into successful NFL players in the past.
We've also seen a lot of people criticize the Seahawks and John Schneider's drafting in the last few years, and a lot of that comes down to they were so good 2010, 2011, 2012. They were so good at drafting, the best team in the NFL at drafting those 3 seasons. I feel very confident in being able to say that. And then 2013 was a bad draft. And then 2014 and 2015, I think they came away with a couple of good pieces. And I think you could say that it was perhaps average or fair. But people don't like to say that average or fair is acceptable because of the drafts that they had in 2011, 2010, and 2012. And a big piece of that success was Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and, you know, Byron Maxwell, and they basically being able to get guys on day 3 that, you know, elevated their team and their defense to something that was championship worthy. Is there anything that you think in drafting Richard Sherman in 2011 in the 5th round, or, you know, drafting Cam Chancellor in the 5th round in 2010, they sort of set trends in being able to find those players at a time when teams weren't looking for players of that physical ilk or of that certain sort of makeup. Do you see in 2018 there being much harder to find a Richard Sherman or a Cam Chancellor or one of these 5th, 6th, 7th round gems, just based on the fact that teams are now more aware of the deficiencies and market inefficiencies that the Seahawks were taking advantage of back then? Or is it still possible for them to, you know, use those market inefficiencies to their advantage now?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it. They were victims of their own success. They were the only ones in 2010, 2011 looking for guys with that athletic profile, with guys with that length. And the rest of the NFL caught up to it real quick. I mean, like, you see Stanley Jean-Baptiste the year after they won the Super Bowl. He's going in the 2nd round, and he never once looked like an NFL player. But I mean, he went right up there because of the success of Brandon Brown, or the success of Byron Maxwell, the success of Richard Sherman. And I think that's just kind of tightened the market because of it.
So what are you looking for in the combine this upcoming week? What are going to be the strongest positions, or the positions of you know, your greatest interest?
I mean, I definitely think after that whole conversation about how they're not important, I think the running back position is still really interesting, and obviously one to watch for Seattle, because whether we like it or not, there's a really good chance that they target a running back with their first selection. So, I mean, you've seen Ronald Jones attached to the Seahawks quite often. It's going to be really interesting to see what he weighs in at, because he played at 200 pounds by USC. I've read a couple of things that he might be up in the 210, 215 range. If he's in that area, I think he becomes a legitimate possibility. If he's at 200, it's hard to envision him being an every down back in the NFL, and I think that kind of knocks him out of day 1, day 2. He's an incredibly explosive runner. He's maybe the most pleasing runner to watch. He's so fun. But at 200 pounds, it's hard to survive on every single down in the NFL. I think, we'll get a kind of more clear idea of who fits in a running back. Again, the cornerback thing, it'll be really interesting to have a clear picture of who measures into the 32-inch arms, who is athletic. There's a couple guys that played at the Senior Bowl with 32-inch arms, but were just so slow, like just non-athletes that we can kind of wipe out already. So there's going to be a few new guys coming into the picture. But yeah, as far as needs go, for me, it's edge rush is the big one. they really, really need to get someone who can hit double-digit sacks, and then running backs, cornerbacks.
Mm-hmm. You wrote an article in January for us that was about the running back ideals and the draft philosophy for the Seahawks. Can you talk about the ideals and the physical profile for the running backs?
Yeah, so in Pete Carroll and John Schneider's history in Seattle, they've kind of targeted a specific kind of back, and it's one with really good size, kind of between 5'10" and 6'1", in that 215, 230-pound range. They're explosive. They usually broad jump around 10 foot, a vertical jump around 35 inches, and then 40 time. People kind of question whether the 40 is important or not. It really just needs to display like that the prospect has functional speed, that they're not Jarvis Landry like running through molasses. So anything kind of in that like 4.65 range is acceptable. But pretty much as it's honestly a little bit more simple than other prospects in that they're looking for size and explosiveness, which sounds simple, but some NFL teams still haven't really caught up to that.
And a lot of the mock drafts that are coming out right now, especially from the classic, league wide or NFL wide, like the people that people look to, like Mel Kiper or Todd McShay or Gil Brandt or whatever. So many of them have a cornerback or a safety going to the Seahawks in the first round, and the Seahawks haven't drafted a cornerback in the first round under Pete Carroll and John Schneider. They haven't drafted a cornerback in the second round under Pete Carroll and John Schneider. The only safety that they've taken in the first 2 rounds has been Earl Thomas back in 2010. Shaquille Griffin was the highest drafted cornerback of this, current regime, 8 drafts, and he went 90th or something like that. And yet they have Derwin James, or they have a cornerback of some other ilk, and it keeps on happening over and over and over again, and no one addresses the history of this team and the fact that they feel so confident, taking those players later on, and the fact that they could re-sign Bradley McDougald and have no need to replace Cam Chancellor through the draft, or that if they do decide to, you can see where I'm going with this. Do you see any possibility of the Seahawks drafting a secondary player with their first pick? And it's fine, if you agree with them or think that it's possible, of course. But what do you think about all the Derwin James or the safety or the cornerback talk early?
I definitely agree. As far as the cornerback is concerned, I can't see them going early there. There's a lot of good players that kind of fit into what they like that should be available on day 3. As of right now, it seems like Richard Sherman will still be on the team for this coming season. So you can get a guy on day 3, and he doesn't need to be pressed into action immediately, but he kind of fits what you like already. You have a year of him learning the kick step, kind of learning the system, which is obviously invaluable to Seattle because we've seen guys come in from the outside and just crash and burn. As far as safeties are concerned, Derwin James would make some sense just because he's not a prototypical safety. You can do so much with him it is worth drafting him high.
Mm-hmm.
He's obviously he's been hot and cold kind of his entire time in Florida State, but if he's going to play his best in the NFL, it's going to be in a place like Seattle where they're going to get the best out of him. Like we've seen, different position, but we've seen Jared Goff, we've seen Mitch Trubisky, where if it's the wrong situation, prospects can crash and burn regardless of their talent. Derwin James is probably a similar situation just because he's been so inconsistent in college, but if you're to land in Seattle, I think you're going to get the best out of him just because of the environment he's coming into. And that's a player that he kind of matches up with what you need in the modern NFL. He can cover running backs. He can cover tight ends. He can come down, play off the edge. He's just so diverse. He's worth that high of a selection.
You wrote about Derwin James and Kaiser White, recently for us as well. And you mentioned that Derwin has been up and down at Florida State. If for a guy like me who typically just brushes and glances over, draft prospects a year ahead of time, 2 years ahead of time, just to get an idea of what's happening without really following all of the college games and everything like that. Derwin James is a guy that seemed like a year ago was seen as a lock for the top 5, and now, is maybe falling further down the first round and had been all season long. Can you explain Derwin James history, what that up and down thing is all about, and the Kaiser White fallback option?
Yeah, I mean, when he plays at his peak, you can see why Derwin James was kind of bandied about as a top 5 selection, because he truly is an incredible athlete. And if somebody gets the best out of him in the NFL, it wouldn't be a surprise for him to outplay even say Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's likely to go top 5. His talent is incredible. You just don't see it on every single snap. I mean, there are plays in the Bama game, so there's like the highest level of competition possible. And on one play, he's burning off the edge, getting to the quarterback, swatting the ball. Then the quarterback actually caught the swat, broke to the sideline. Derwin James turns himself around, closes on him. Incredible play. Maybe 5 prospects in the entire draft can make that play. And then the very next play, they hand off to Damian Harris, and James takes a lazy angle, and Harris gets an extra 10 yards out of it. And it's just so many instances of that where you see, oh my God, this guy is incredible. And then the next player is just wondering where the hell he is. So it's really just going to come down to whether or not you get the best version of Derwin James. And again, Seattle is the place that would absolutely get the best out of him.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's worth a first-round selection because you didn't see it all the time, who knows? People like to make fun of like NFL scouts or how kind of old-fashioned they are, but this is the side of NFL scouting that those in the media don't see, where it's going to have Derwin James is going to walk into a room with the Seahawks management on the opposite side of the table, the team's management on the opposite side of the table, and they're going to show him that play of Damian Harris burning down the sideline and Derwin James lazily like jogging to him, and they're going to ask, "What the hell, man? You're capable of being the best player on the field. What was this? Why are you doing that?" And it's just is he gonna own up to it? Is he gonna kind of scapegoat something? That's really gonna be a big factor in him being a big selection or not. And then as far as Kaiser White goes, he played a similar diverse role at West Virginia, and I think similar to Derwin James, he's the kind of safety that's worth drafting high, in that he can still cover running backs, he can cover tight ends. We've seen Cam Chancellor set the edge like a defensive end in the defense. He can absolutely do that. He's pretty much just a less dynamic version of Derwin James. He may not be able to survive kind of in space as well, but I think he can do similar things, maybe just not to as great of an effect.
In terms of the scouting combine and the NFL draft in general, there's a lot of, there's going to be a lot of talk about the quarterbacks. There's 4 or 5 of them that are, swapping positions constantly and going down different places in the first round. It could be, the most, quarterback heavy first round since, 83 or whatever. It seems like there's a lot going on there, and nobody wants to agree on the quarterbacks, which probably means that out of 4 or 5, 2 or 3 are going to be good and 2 or 3 are going to be total busts. And it's something that doesn't seem like is going to really matter at the combine. Do you see the quarterbacks shifting heavily one way or the other, or is that going to take more stuff in terms of pro days and one-on-ones to really figure out these 5 guys, and who is the guy that you think is the guy?
Yeah, I think it will come down to the wire. The only thing I could see changing with the combine is he's obviously a huge topic right now, but just Josh Allen, the way he handled himself at the Senior Bowl, I wasn't totally impressed. He was kind of deflecting. He didn't take total responsibility for why he played so poorly at times. So you just want to see him kind of, as much as we make fun of Russell Wilson for being robotic at times, you do want to see that in your quarterback. You want to see Josh Allen kind of take responsibility for that, put it on his shoulders. I'm the quarterback. I need to make those throws. Doesn't matter about the talent around me. But I don't think it will change much after Indianapolis. And for me personally, Josh Rosen is the best quarterback in the class. People are going to love him or hate him based off his off-field stuff. I think he's going to be a total breath of fresh air. He reminds me a lot of Aaron Rodgers in that he's just not afraid to speak up. He's going to say whatever the hell he wants, which, again, some teams will love that. Some teams will hate that.
Mm-hmm.
But he resembles an NFL quarterback already for me, and I think if he comes in week 1, he'll have as much success as we've seen from, honestly, any rookie quarterback in recent memory here. He's an incredible passer.
And do you see anything with the other quarterbacks in terms of stay far away?
definitely Josh Allen still. I, again, don't really love the way that he's handled everything. And then it's just like the Jake Locker thing where you see all these physical traits that you can fall in love with, but the accuracy isn't there. And accuracy is the one thing that you can't really learn at the next level. And he doesn't have it. And it's hard to imagine him developing it. The idea of drafting a guy that high that is so inaccurate at times is kind of terrifying, because there's a really good chance that it just never comes for him, and you've wasted a top 10 selection on a guy that you saw overthrow guys in college consistently.
Last year at the NFL Scouting Combine, we saw, UW, a local school. John Ross broke the 40-yard dash record, and then made news, and then was the 9th overall pick, and then by the Bengals, and perhaps had, one of the worst rookie seasons of anyone in recent memory in terms of draft status, excitement, and then producing nothing. He had 1 catch for 12 yards, inactive, and just not a piece of that team whatsoever, despite the lofty status. And this year, there's another UW player who could be the focus and the star of the combine with Vita Vea. Who are some of the scouting combine stars that you expect this year, this week? And any concerns in terms of like a scouting combine star being, sort of distracting from whether or not he's an actual football player?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Vita Vea is concerned, he's a really, really good player at what he does, but it kind of goes back to, like, it's not a direct comparison to Danny Shelton, because that's just a bit lazy because it's the same school. But what he does well is stop the run, and he does it incredibly, incredibly well. But why would you draft a defensive tackle in the top 15, in the top 20, who isn't going to push the pocket, isn't going to be able to rush the passer? It's just like people have this idea in their head that Danny Shelton is a bust because he isn't putting up double-digit sacks and he was drafted in the top 15. What he does, he's done incredibly well still at the NFL. He just doesn't rush the passer. So what's the value in that? I mean, we saw 2 years ago the Seahawks bring in Tony McDaniel in the middle of August, and he's played pretty well, and he played consistently. He did what he was asked to do.
And Jaron Reed, it seems like, would be your ideal draft position for a guy that does that.
Exactly. And honestly, I think even Jaron Reed, we've seen more pass rushing upside than we will see from Vita Vea. There's been a lot of buzz that he's going to have a Don Terry Poe-like combine performance, which if he does, good for him. I'm still just not sure that changes anything, because you never saw him really collapse the pocket and rush from the interior in college, and I don't think that's something he's going to develop in the NFL. It's not a knock against him. He stops the run incredibly well. He's so powerful at the point of attack, but what you see is what you get with him, really.
And anybody else, and some other names to look for in terms of the athletic, maybe combine stars?
Yeah, there's kind of definitely a couple guys to watch at every single position. If we're talking strictly defensive tackles, the biggest guy that I'm excited to see is Nathan Shepard from Fort Hays State, who people might remember he was getting a ton of buzz down at Senior Bowl week. He's kind of tearing everybody apart. Everybody wasn't sure what to make of this dude who came from a small school. He transferred from Simon Fraser University in Canada, and then was just absolutely destroying guys in one-on-ones at Senior Bowl week, and then broke his hand, so his week ended early. And he looks he's a physical freak. I mean, he's a guy that could absolutely blow up the combine. He might have kind of run out of time to get out of that day 3 range, but with a good combine, there is a chance that he becomes a round 3 possibility. And he's one of the guys that you're going to see those kind of weird tweets from people during weigh-ins that are like, scouts, there's audible gasps in the weigh room when he stepped up on the scale, because he is a physical freak.
And, feel free to hit any position, any player. Like, I know that there's the guy from Boise State, or what else might people be coming away from this week, like, as the guy who's jumped up around, or the guy who is really, like, sort of taking center stage?
Yeah, definitely that Boise State linebacker, Vander Esch, he should have a really, really line. The crappy thing for him is he's kind of firmly the 3rd best linebacker in this class, and the 2 above him, Tremaine Edwards and Roquan Smith, are also exceptional athletes. So his combine won't be as impressive with these 2 guys in front of him, pretty much just matching him. Like, whatever he does, they'll probably test equally as well. So I can't really see his stock rising that much because of it. as while we're talking about linebackers, though, as it pertains to the Seahawks, Texas's Malik Jefferson. There's a chance that he's kind of going to test so well that he gets out of Seattle's range. But I really think linebacker is something Seattle needs to address at the combine, because Wagner and Wright are playing way, way too much recently. I think they're kind of in that 90-95% range recently. In Super Bowl 48 season, they were at around 80%, and they just kind of never replaced Malcolm Smith's snaps, which it makes a huge difference. That's 100, 150 snaps, and you kind of saw Wagner get worn down. His hamstring started to nag at him towards the end of the year. And Malik Jefferson, he's an incredible, incredible athlete. I think he ran a sub 4.4 40 in high school.
Wow.
And he's the kind of guy that's worth drafting in a mid-round pick because he can cover tight ends and backs. He can play sideline to sideline. He may not be so physical that he can come down, kind of fill lanes, but that's not as pressing as it was 10 years ago. And I think that's a guy that Seattle would have looked at. But if he's going to test really well in Indianapolis, there's a chance he kind of gets into that second, third round talk, and that might be too rich for Seattle.
So in terms of just the Seahawks in that first pick, when you're looking at 18 and when you talk about the range, we're probably talking more like we're probably talking more like 25 to 30, because as you mentioned, the idea of them not trading down seems just like the most unlikely thing that they could do with that pick. Last year, over 50% of the total picks in the draft were traded. So you think about it in terms of that, it's like a team in general is more likely to trade their pick than not trade it. I mean, every trade must involve, not every trade, but most trades must involve at least 2 picks, if not 3 or 4 or 5. But that just means, so we're talking about how most picks are traded. And in the first round, that number probably goes down to like the 25 to 30%. But for the Seahawks, having traded all of their first round picks and since 2012, they've traded it every time. It's even more likely. So if that range is outside of the top 25 or whatever, who are the names that you keep gravitating towards?
That's a tricky one because for me, their biggest need by far is pass rush. But once you kind of get that top 20 range, it starts being very solidly kind of round 2 prospects. What I ultimately think will happen is they're going to move down from 18 to where, in that mid 20 range. And if one of those big 5 quarterbacks is still on the board, I could see someone who drafted high in the first round, who didn't address the quarterback position, kind of come back up into the first. Seattle bumps back down into the second. And then you can kind of start looking at guys like Kamiko Toure from Rutgers or Josh Sweat from Florida State, who are those kind of bendy pass rushers who can get around the corner. They're really impressive athletes, and they're really solid options in the second round of the draft. If they stick at 18, a pass rusher they could look at is Harold Landry, who, again, like Derwin James, one of the most talented players in the entire draft, but you just didn't see it all the time. The one kind of concern that I would have with him is he's, I think, around 250 pounds. So whether he can play the Leo position in Seattle's defense kind of on every single down, I'm not totally sure. But he's one of those guys that you see sort of the NFL overcorrect year after year. And he's one of those guys that had he come out the year after Denver won the Super Bowl and Von Miller looked like the best defender in the NFL, I think he would have been a top 10 prospect because he has similar traits in that he has the kind of bend where he can get around the corner and it doesn't really make sense how he did it despite you seeing it. But I think kind of a couple of years down the road, things have sort of reset. He'll be around in those top 20 selections. Again, I just don't know that he could play every single down in a 4-3, which would be the one concern of spending a first-round pick on him.
Yeah, that's interesting. And in terms of day 3, the Seahawks, we talked about how they have, they've got their 1 day 1 pick and they've got no day 2 picks, and maybe they trade, they get another day 2 pick or 2 day 2 picks, maybe something like that. But in terms of day 3, they're heavy hitters. They've got like 4 5th round picks and 4 7th round picks, and it may be the 5th and 7th round, but last year they added Chris Carson in the 7th round. We've talked about some of their earlier 5th round picks, and with the Seahawks, it's a philosophy that I agree with, which is, it's a sliding scale of your hit rate. And in the first round, you're going to have a much higher hit rate than in the 7th round. But in general, I think a good team recognizes the randomness and unpredictability of every prospect with 100% across the board, every prospect is unpredictable. You don't know how good or how bad they're going to be. You just have a good idea. And with that, I think for the teams that accept that, like the New England Patriots, who have made more draft picks since 2001 than any other team in the NFL, you just take as many picks as you can. You work them out into your system. You realize that half of them are going to fade out, and you realize that some of them are going to be stars, and you just take as many as you can. So day 3, they've got these 5th round and 7th round picks. They may reduce those picks by trying to trade back up into the 3rd round if there's someone that they like a lot. But in general, with all of those day 3 picks, are there some sleepers, some guys that you are looking around and that could fill their needs? Or maybe even if it doesn't fill their needs, maybe it's a quarterback, because they're going to need one of those as a backup. Is there any, who are some of maybe the names to look out for on day 3?
Yeah, actually, prior to last week, I would have said this guy is someone they should target kind of if they can get into that round 2 range. But Tony Pauline reported that teams see him as a last day player, and that's Ogbonia Okoronkwo from Oklahoma. Very easy name to say. And I wrote about him a little bit before the Senior Bowl. But for me, he can do every single thing Bruce Irvin did for the Seahawks, which is play off the ball at outside linebacker in base, and he can come down and he can rush the passer on passing downs. He played in a 3-4 at Oklahoma, so he has experience playing off the ball. He carried tight ends down the field, and then he got after the passer, and he looked really, really good doing it. And Irvin's role in Seattle has never been replaced, really. They haven't found someone to do it. It was a unique role, and he's kind of one of the first few players that I've seen come around that can do all the things that Irvin can do. And if you can get him in day 3, I think that's awesome value. That's the kind of guy I would have thought would go day 3 maybe 5 years ago when teams were scared off by the tweener label. But now tweeners, you no longer see a guy that can't maybe do anything at the next level. You can see a guy who can do a bunch of different things, and that's reflecting the way the offense is going, with receivers kind of lining up in the slot, tight ends splitting out wide, and that's also being reflected on defense, where you're seeing safeties come down into the box, you're seeing safeties play in the slot, and he's another guy that he can do 2 things really well, and I think that has tremendous value. I was really caught off guard that he was reported as a day 3 pick. Whether that's still a fact as the draft gets closer, I'm not sure. He won't be as electric in the combine as Irvin was, because Irvin was an incredible athlete. But yeah, I think he knew everything Bruce Irvin did, and he would be an awesome, awesome selection for Seattle. That's kind of the first name that I think of when I think of round 3, just because he's easily one of my favorite players in the draft, honestly. As far as pass rushers are concerned, there's another player, Ade Aruna from Tulane. He's an utter physical freak. He's drawing Marcus Hunt comparisons, which maybe isn't the most complimentary thing in terms of Hunt's NFL career, but I mean, he is still one of the most amazing athletes to come around. Yeah, he's incredibly inconsistent. I think he started playing football in high school after coming over. He was born in Guinea, I believe. Sorry if that's incorrect. But yeah, he's another guy who, if he's the sort of player that you want to draft in round 6 or round 7, because he could give you 10 sacks in 3 years' time when he develops into a complete pass rusher, or he could give you absolutely nothing and he could never develop. And that's a risk that you take in all of your day 3 selections. But at least somebody like him has such a high ceiling where you're going to get tremendous value if it works out. And if not, it's a 6th or 7th round pick, and the risk was always there. Rather than getting a guy, okay, we draft a guy in the 7th round and he's going to contribute on special teams, there's just such a limited ceiling. You can get someone like that in rookie free agency. You can get someone like that on, the 3rd week of free agency even. He's a guy, his upside is just so high that that's the kind of risk you want to take, in my opinion.
I want to get back into the first round really quickly. One guy that Mike Mayock, he says, I think the 2 best players I've seen on tape are Saquon Barkley and Quentin Nelson. So in this draft, those seem to be the 2 guys that stand out as generational talents at their positions for some people out there. We talked about Saquon Barkley. Quentin Nelson was a guy that, maybe a month ago, people were talking about with the Seahawks at 18 if they stayed there, but now probably maybe doesn't get outside of the top 10, and especially if he has this sort of combine or whatever that some may expect. What do you see for Quentin Nelson? I do think that it is it is bad to draft a guard early in the first top 10 or whatever. And, I think even at 18 or 20 or something like that, even if you're getting the best guard, there's something where how good is that? How much better is that going to make you? As a team going to turn into a Super Bowl team because they upgraded their left guard positions? But Mayock makes the point that, the high level interior pass rushers today are much better than they were 5 years ago. And, for a team like the Seahawks, they struggle the most against Aaron Donald, teams that have K'Wan Short, teams that have that guy in the middle that disrupts what Russell Wilson and the running backs want to do. So in terms of Quentin Nelson or an interior player, any thoughts on him individually and in drafting guards in general early?
Yeah, I think it's sort of similar to like the perceived lack of value in right tackles, where it's sort of an older way of looking at it because you see guys rushing from the opposite side. I mean, Von Miller and Khalil Mack predominantly rush from the defense's left against right tackles, so they're just as valuable as the left tackle who's protecting the quarterback's blind side. And that's similar to guards now. I mean, interior pass rushers, you see teams that don't have an answer. Aaron Donald's just wrecking game plans week after week after week because teams just have no idea what to do with this dude who is lining up inside but can get across the guard's face in like a third of a second. And you're seeing kind of every single team try to correct and find somebody like that. And I think guards are going to have more and more value because you kind of need guys to respond to that. I don't necessarily think it's as bad of a decision to draft a guard high. He'll go top 10 for sure. And I think he's worth that pick. He's just kind of, it's like when Zach Martin got drafted, where you kind of select the guy, and as much risk as every prospect has, you just sort of think, okay, we're going to plug this guy in, and he's going to give us 10 solid seasons. And that's where I think a team like the Niners would make a lot of sense because you have to game plan for teams inside your division. Seattle is obviously in a huge transitional phase, but if we're looking 5 years down the road, maybe the Niners and the Rams are in better positions than the Seahawks. And if the Niners are competing with the Rams year after year, you need that guy that can line up across from Aaron Donald in every single game and kind of be that answer to him. Because we've seen Aaron Donald completely destroy the Seahawks at times. And so I feel like kind of you select Quentin Nelson and you can just sort of think, okay, that's fine. We have somebody that can take care of Aaron Donald. But as far as kind of how much does a guard change our chances of winning, I think it depends. Like for a team like Seattle who doesn't pour or who hasn't poured that much resources into offensive line, maybe it doesn't make a whole bunch of sense to draft a guard because then it's okay, we have this all-pro guard, but around him are a bunch of like Jags. Mm-hmm. If you're a team like Dallas who's going to build from the offensive line outwards, then it makes a bunch of sense because you're just adding another strength into your strength. But yeah, he maybe it wouldn't be the best decision for some teams, but I think a team like San Francisco would make a lot of sense. Or even Oakland. You see Oakland has so much money poured into their offensive line already. If you want to get out of one of those guard contracts in a year or two's time and you can actually start to allocate money towards the defense, you have kind of a replacement waiting. Get rid of, say, Kelechi Osemele, although he's maybe the best guard in the NFL. Yeah. In a couple of years' time, you can save a bunch of money when, assuming Amari Cooper bounces back, you need to pay him. You're going to have to pay Khalil Mack. There's guys on the opposite side of the ball that are going to need to get paid. Then it could start to make some sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And finally, it may be too early for this. We may need the combine first, but is there any identity in terms of potential position switch for offensive linemen, defensive tackles, defensive ends, or tight ends, players that seem to be like they could be the next project? Because that seems to be one thing that we are honing more and more and more on, which is no offensive linemen are being trained correctly at the college level. So really all you're doing is drafting the best bodies, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it certainly can set you back a year or two in your NFL career to have to learn how to play offensive guard or offensive tackle. But it seems like we're edging more towards the scenario where we're just drafting the best athletes. Do you see that? And do you see has anyone been identified as like a potential switch over from defense to offense?
Yeah, I don't really have anybody in mind yet that could be a potential transitional player, just because from my point of view, I've kind of focused more on the tackles as far as offensive line is concerned. And I think we've seen kind of more interior guys be conversion conversions. Just because I mean, you play so high, right? But you know, I think we'll get a better idea because there'll be guys that kind of blow up the combine that have numbers that reflect sort of elite defensive tackle testing numbers, where you can start to see, okay, well, his offensive line performance is not very good. He's maybe a 7th-round prospect, but he fits these things that we've seen succeed. He has a really great 3-cone. You know, he's squatty. He's really quick in short bursts. And this is the kind of things that can translate to defensive tackle, that can translate to the line and have success. So we might see some names pop up kind of after the combine, but nobody's really jumped out at me as far as a conversion goes yet.
Alistair Corp, appreciate having you on. Is there anything else in terms of the combine? I asked you to do, you knew that you were coming on, and you think you did some research, and maybe I didn't hit all those points. Was there anything on the table of note, of particular interest that I left out, or do you think we hit it all?
Yeah, we hit a good portion. I would just say I think they do need to add a cornerback on day 3 if they don't address it early. Just a couple of guys there that I think are worth watching. Cameron Kelly from San Diego State. He's a converted safety, came down to cornerback this year. He's going to be playing with the safeties again in Indy, but I think he's a corner long-term, and he's an incredible athlete. He has really good length. He's a guy that can make sense if you select him. He gets a year to kind of get embedded in the system, becomes an option. And then same with Holton Hill, who was suspended because of a violation of team rules at Texas. Had he not been, he probably would have been a 1st or 2nd round prospect. He's probably a day 3 prospect as is, but he's 6'3", he's 200 pounds. He's a good athlete. If he's there on day 3 and Seattle's kind of comfortable with the off-field stuff, he could make a ton of sense. But yeah, we hit a good amount of stuff there.
Great. Alistair Corp, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Alistair Corp, and then you can find me on Field Goals. And if you want to read about the Cleveland Browns, you can find my stuff on the Browns Wire, part of USA Today Network. And yeah, thank you so much, Kenny.
Oh, I mean, that's funny because I didn't even hit on this, but like really quick, 1-4. Where do you stand right now with the Browns?
I mean, I think Josh Rosen has to be the selection first. I don't think he will be. I think it'll be Sam Darnold. The big thing is they just need to stop. They need to stop avoiding quarterback, and they just need to draft a guy in the 1st. You can't keep kicking it down the road. You have to you have so many picks, just start throwing darts at the board. Stop taking guys like Kaiser and Kessler. Get the top guy and just see what happens. If he busts, he busts. It's fine. Take your lumps. And at 4, I think Minkah Fitzpatrick would make a ton of sense because they tried to play Jabril Peppers as the single high safety last year, and he was a disaster. They're moving him back down to the box, and I think Fitzpatrick, he can kind of do a lot of things that a modern safety can do, in that he can play the slot and he can play single high, and he's well worthy of a top 5 selection.
Great. Alistair Corp, check him out on Field Goals for more scouting, combine, and NFL draft news and information and so on and so forth. For me, follow us on Twitter at Field Goals, or I'm Kenneth Arthur S. If you like the show and want to keep it going, you can help us out through patreon.com/field goals. $1 or $2 is fine. Appreciate the people who, contributed when I asked last week for such a thing. And nobody likes to do it, but here we are. And this is how a lot of people generate content in 2018. So if you feel so inclined, that is the place to do it. And you subscribe on iTunes to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur for all of these podcast episodes. Thanks again to Alistair for coming on to talk about the combine. And this has been this week's Seahawks Chats /3000 NFL mock draft. Come back next time for a new episode and perhaps a totally different show.